Hey adventurers, so we are going to continue through my top 100 books of all time. We are now at place 20, so 20 through 11. So we're coming to the end of the series here, and we will see what I've got. To start out at number 20, I have The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This is a short story. I actually ended up reading most of it in one day, which is rare for me. The only reason I could do that though is because it's so short. This edition that I have is only 127 pages, and I think I read about 110 or so of those in one day, and it's just fantastic short story novella. I think a short book that packs so much into it, and it's a very slow, very character-driven story about this old man and the sea, and just his experience of being out on the sea over the course of like a day or 2 or 3 or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the timeline is for this book, but he's just out fishing, and you see his thought process, you see his mindset, his lifestyle, and how it all affects everything, and just his personality, his drive to accomplish the task that he's been set. And just it's full of themes. It's very thematically heavy book, but it's just a very, very good story as well. And part of, I think, maybe why I loved it as much as I did is because I'd heard from so many people, this is a boring book, this is one of the worst books I've ever read, all that kind of stuff. But then I go through and read it, and it's amazing. So anyways, definitely deserves to be on this list, even though this list is dominated by fantasy. This book is fantastic. Moving on to number 19, I have The Silmarillion. I think I initially wanted to place this at like number 20 or number 25, so it's still not super far off from that position. I do love this book. Absolutely, this is a 5-star book for me every time I read it, because I just enjoy what Tolkien is doing here. But I also understand that it is a hard book, and it is not for everybody, and technically it probably shouldn't be a 5-star. It should probably be like a 3.5, 4-star, because it's dense and it is hard to get through, but I love it. I enjoy every moment of reading this. I enjoy seeing the background and the history of this world, and seeing, again, through it you see Tolkien's process, you see his mindset as he's approaching the building of this world. And even though he didn't ever release this book, it was his son Christopher who went through and edited it. It's still fantastic. I really do enjoy this book, and it deserves to be on this list again, because this is my personal top 10 or top 100, I guess, but it's hard to get through, and so because of that I can't actually put it up a whole lot higher than I have it here. Number 18 though is another Tolkien, and that is Tales from the Perilous Realm. This is one that I just finished in December, and it is a collection of his novellas and short stories. Some of them are short stories. It's also got some of his poetry and one of his essays, and that essay is his famous On Fairy Stories essay. Fantastic essay. Brilliant. Again, seeing how Tolkien thinks and how he approaches storytelling is so cool to me. And it has definitely influenced the way that I see and approach stories as well, and even view the world to some degree. But the other stories in this book, also fantastic. Roverandom is in many ways like a second The Hobbit, except that it's not about a hobbit, and it's not so high fantasy. It's more portal fantasy actually to some degree than it is high fantasy, but it's also low fantasy, kind of portal fantasy. It's a genre blend for sure, but it has that same feel to it as The Hobbit does. This is clearly a story written for children, but that adults can take just as much enjoyment out of as the kids can, and will probably actually get more because they can understand the world better. So there's lots of things in it. The rest of the stories, Farmer Giles of Ham was another fantastic one that was just fun, and it felt like a Roald Dahl story, or a kind of a fairy tale to some degree. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil is his collection of poetry, 2 of which are about Tom Bombadil, so it's great to see more of Tom. And then Smith of Wootton Major is very different. This one feels very much like a fairy tale. It feels this is in the truest form, even by Tolkien standards, what I would consider a fairy story. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed Smith of Wootton Major as well. And then Leaf by Niggle is one of the ones that is very acclaimed, critically acclaimed, and it is fantastic. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Smith of Wootton Major, but I did enjoy it a lot. Anyways, so this one definitely deserves to be up here, and I think just because of how much easier it is to read, it does actually belong higher than Silmarillion. Let's try and move through this a little bit faster. We've got number 17 is The Farthest Shore. This is one of the books in the Earthsea cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. I don't remember if this is book 3 or if this is book 6. I think it's book 3. And I really enjoyed this one. I've talked about in my previous editions of this Top 100 series how I really like the Earthsea books and how I really like what Le Guin is doing with them, and how they're more, although there is an adventure aspect to them, they're more contemplative, they're more thematic, they're more philosophical, and I enjoy that side of the books as well. And that same thing applies to The Farthest Shore. Perhaps this should be pushed down a little ways, but it's alright where it is. I'm fine with that. Number 16 is The Magician's Nephew. This is actually, I believe, and I just do a quick check real fast. Yeah, I believe that this is my favorite of the Narnia books, the Chronicles of Narnia. And this is the origins of Narnia. This is the creation of Narnia. It's also got one of my favorite tropes, which is this idea of a world between worlds, the wood between worlds, I believe it is called in this one. Yeah, the wood between worlds. But the idea of a place that exists outside of time and space, and that allows you to then travel to various other places through time and space. A world between worlds, as it is in Star Wars, the wood between worlds as it is in this. And I love that idea. It's one of it's actually even the ways from Wheel of Time is the same sort of idea. It's an in-between land, a liminal space. And I really love that idea. So of course that ties into my enjoyment of it, but also this is just, it has the same level of whimsy and fun as the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but then it also tells a very different story, and one that I enjoy more due to these other aspects that they're bringing in, including the creation of Narnia. Another one that has a lot of Christian symbolism, Christian theming and allegory, but very different than his other books as well. Number 15 I have as The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is, I believe, the Mistborn Era 1, Book 2. This is a lot of people's least favorite of the Mistborn series because it's not as action heavy, and I love this book. It is slower, it is more political, but I wouldn't say that it's worse, I'd just say that it is different. It's a different type of story than is being told in The Final Empire, which is a very fast-paced revolution story. This one is a very political fantasy story, and then book 3 is just kind of a high fantasy story of building a world, building a society in a way that is started here, but it's also explored more in that third book. But The Well of Ascension, because it is a little bit slower, I did put it a little bit lower on this list than the other books in the Mistborn series, but I do really enjoy this one a lot, and really all 3 of the Mistborn books, depending on when you ask me, they'll all be about tied, and which one I actually have on top varies pretty regularly. So very much enjoy Tolkien, very much enjoy Sanderson's Mistborn Era 1 and The Well of Ascension. Number 14, I have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is one that I read for the first time, was it the beginning of 2022, I want to say? I haven't read it a second time yet. So the only time that I've read it was like my first book that I read, I think in 2022. And it blew me away. This story is fantastic, and I fully understand why so many people love it and why it is considered a classic, because it deserves it. This book is such a great story. It is a coming-of-age story for Scout, and it does deal with a lot of hard-hitting topics, but it's done in such a way that it is very tastefully done. It is very important. The discussions that are being had are very important, especially to the time that it was being written and the time that it was written about. So I understand why this book is taught so often and so acclaimed, because it's worth it. It is absolutely fantastic, and it's not hard to read, and it's not super long. I don't know, I very much enjoyed this book. Number 13 then is Madook. This is the third and final book in the Leoness trilogy by Jack Vance, and this is my favorite of the 3 books. I really like the other 2 books, as I already obviously have talked about because I know that they are lower, which is, let's see, Soldran's Garden and The Green Pearl are the first 2 books. But then this Madook, there's things about it that I like a little bit less. but this, just as a whole, the story as a whole, it built so much upon what was developed in those first 2 books that I can't help but loving this book the most. Again, I recently, I don't know if it'll have gone up by the time you're seeing this or not, but I filmed a review for The Way of Kings, and I talked about how I like endings. I just briefly mentioned it. But this one, I love endings. I find that the endings, when they're well done, are the best books in the series almost every single time. And that's what this is. It takes and builds upon everything that has come before it and does it in such a way that you can make this last book and make it the best that it can possibly be, and better than the other 2 books that came before it. And that's what happened with Madook. Certain aspects I liked about Soljan's Garden, and certain aspects I liked about The Green Pearl just slightly more, but overall as a whole, Madook is my favorite book in the trilogy. Number 12 is another Tolkien, and that is The Children of Hurin, and this is, I have long considered this to be my favorite Tolkien story. There is a difference. I say it's my favorite Tolkien story because the experience of reading the book also goes into what is my favorite book. And because of that, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are often my favorite book. But my favorite story, for just the story that is contained in the pages, it's right here. This is a very dark, very, very different type of story than The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, or really pretty much any of his other books. This is a tragedy through and through, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely fantastic the way that Tolkien tells this story, the way that he creates this story and sets it up from the beginning for failure. And you love Turin and you love Nienor? Yeah, I think that's her name. And just the characters that come into this book, Beleg, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the petty dwarves, there's so much about this world. Tolkien fleshes out the world so much. Even the Silmarillion I just talked about it's an overview of the world. It is, in many ways, as so many people have said, it is the Bible for Tolkien, for Middle-earth. It is the Middle-earth Bible, and that's true. The Children of Hurin takes one piece of that and expands upon it. And I mean, you could say the same thing about The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. It takes one piece of the history of in the world of Middle-earth and zooms in on it and expands it and tells the story in its entirety. This does the same thing, but with a very different story, that is the story of a family who is cursed by Morgoth, by the Dark Lord, and their fight against that, their fight to survive, their fight to continue going on through that curse. But then they're so important to the history of Middle-earth, to the line of everybody important. It's so interesting, it's so cool to see how this story affects Middle-earth as a whole, and it's just a very, very good story. Cool characters, talking sword, a dragon. What more could you want? And that brings us to number 11, which I briefly sort of already mentioned, and that is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd book in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy, and fantastic. Again, I think why this one edges out the second one most of the time for me is actually because we get so much focus on Lesteborn's story. And that story is so interesting to me, the Survivor of the Flames idea, and the whole carrying on the legacy of Kelsier in a way that is honoring to Kelsier, but is it really? And how does, I don't know, there's so much about this book that's really cool. The expanding of the world, the expanding of the magic system. We just start to understand some things about this world in a way that we don't yet. It's kind of the first book that we truly get a Sanderlanche in. We get them in all the books minorly, but this whole book is kind of a Sanderlanche, as it's the final book in the trilogy, and so it kind of has to deal with so many open threads, while at the same time opening and closing new threads of its own, and also opening some other ones that can be left open for future books, for Mistborn Era 2 and stuff like that. So there's a lot in this book that I really enjoy, and it does just, at the time of writing this list, it does just barely edge out The Well of Ascension for me. So that is numbers 20 through 11 of my top 100 books of all time. Again, this list is subject to change, but it has been fun compiling it so far. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.